It was a Tuesday night, quiet and unremarkable, the kind where the only excitement was the anticipation of a good night's sleep. The kind of night where the world outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the dawn. Mark and I, Laura, had just finished dinner. The kitchen had been cleaned, the dishes put away, and the house settled into its usual evening calm. We were enjoying a glass of wine on the patio, the cool evening air brushing against our skin. The night was serene, and for a brief moment, I tried to convince myself that everything in our life was just as it seemed, peaceful, comfortable, without surprises. Mark had always been the steady one. At 46, he was a successful architect, known for his meticulous nature and his calm demeanor. I, on the other hand, had spent most of my life as a writer, living in the world of words, observing people, crafting stories from their lives. I like to think I had an uncanny sense of perception, that I could read people, understand their moods, and discern their hidden motivations. It was a skill I prided myself on, one that had served me well in both my professional and personal life. But that night, something was different. It wasn't the wine, or the quiet. It was the way Mark looked at Maria, our maid. She had worked with us for several years, a kind and efficient woman in her early 30s. Maria had always been a part of the rhythm of our home, attending to the garden, taking care of things when I was too absorbed in my writing. She had a natural warmth to her, a bright smile that could lift even the heaviest of spirits. But that night, as she trimmed the edges of the flower bed in the dimming light, I noticed something in her demeanor that struck me. She was quiet, almost withdrawn, moving with a deliberate slowness. It was as though she was avoiding the normal cheerfulness that defined her. At first, I thought it was nothing, just the lateness of the hour or perhaps some internal concern that had nothing to do with me. But then I saw Mark's gaze linger on her, just a fraction too long. It wasn't obvious, not to anyone else who might have been watching, but I saw it. His eyes followed her movements as she worked, his focus fixed on her in a way that felt possessive, even though he wasn't saying a word. A subtle tension crept into the air, an undercurrent that I couldn't ignore. My pulse quickened, and my thoughts began to spiral. I couldn't help but wonder, had I missed something? Had I allowed myself to become so complacent in my marriage that I had overlooked signs of something much darker? I told myself I was being ridiculous, imagining things. Mark was my husband, the man I had built a life with. We had weathered challenges together, financial struggles, career transitions, the loss of loved ones, and emerged stronger. Our relationship, though not without its occasional rough patch, had always been a steady constant in my life. I couldn't let my mind jump to conclusions without evidence. But even as I reassured myself, the feeling in my chest, the tightness, the unease, only grew. We finished our wine in silence, the quiet between us a strange kind of tension. Mark's words were few, but his actions spoke volumes. When I asked if he was ready for bed, he nodded but didn't meet my gaze. He seemed distant, preoccupied, and I couldn't help but feel like I was losing him in some unspoken way. That night, sleep eluded me. My mind raced, replaying the events of the evening. I couldn't shake the image of Mark and Maria in the garden, their silhouettes cast long in the pale moonlight. Was it just my imagination, or had there been something more to their interaction? Something that, until that moment, I had chosen to overlook? Around 2 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep. The darkness in our bedroom felt suffocating, and I found myself walking down the hallway toward the kitchen. I needed something, anything, to clear the fog in my mind. A glass of water, a snack perhaps. But when I reached the kitchen, I stopped dead in my tracks. There on the counter was a half-empty bottle of wine. It wasn't the bottle we had been drinking earlier in the evening. This one was different, an expensive red I vaguely recalled Mark keeping hidden in the cellar. Why would he open it? And why hadn't he mentioned it to me? I glanced around the kitchen. There was nothing else unusual. No signs of a late-night snack or some forgotten errand. But the faint scent of Mark's aftershave lingered in the air, an odd detail that hit me with a pang of recognition. His aftershave, sharp, spicy, was a fragrance I had always loved, but now it felt like a reminder of something I couldn't yet comprehend. The evidence was minimal. A bottle of wine, his aftershave in the air. But it was enough. My heart sank. The conclusion was inevitable. The ache in my chest wasn't just from the confusion, it was from the growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. Betrayal. The word echoed in my mind, hollow and painful. The next morning, the weight of what I knew hung over me. Mark, sensing my unease, tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. He was distant, avoiding eye contact, his usual warmth replaced with a cold detachment. As I set the coffee on the table, I turned to him and simply asked, "Did something happen last night?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then finally, his shoulders slumped. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice small, almost apologetic. But there was no denying the truth in his eyes. The guilt was written all over him. The confession came quickly after that, mumbled, filled with half-hearted apologies. He didn't offer much of an explanation, and I didn't want to hear one. The damage had already been done. Maria, the woman who had worked in our home for years, was fired immediately. There was no question about that. But firing her didn't erase what had transpired. It didn't erase the betrayal, the pain. In the days that followed, I tried to hold everything together. Mark suggested couples counseling, but I knew deep down that our relationship had already begun to unravel in ways that couldn't be fixed with a few therapy sessions. The trust had been shattered, and no amount of words could restore what had been lost. The quiet dignity of our life had been destroyed, and I was left to pick up the pieces. Weeks passed, and the emotional turmoil began to seep into every corner of our existence. We slept in separate rooms, our conversations few and far between. When we did speak, it was about practical matters, finances, the house, logistics. The emotional connection between us had disintegrated, and in its place, there was only a hollow silence. The woman I had been, the woman who had believed in the strength of her marriage, who had trusted her husband implicitly, was gone, replaced by someone who was unsure, broken, and lost. We tried to pretend that everything was okay. Mark continued to go to work, his face a mask of professionalism, but I could see the weariness in his eyes. I knew he felt the weight of his actions, though he rarely showed it. I, on the other hand, was consumed with a quiet fury. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the silence, the way Mark had withdrawn from me even as he sought to justify what he had done. I couldn't bring myself to forgive him, not yet. And the thought of trying to rebuild what we had seemed impossible. Then came the moment when it all became clear. We sat down for another conversation, this time in the living room, the sunlight filtering through the blinds in a way that made everything feel surreal. Mark tried to speak, but the words were hollow. I looked at him, and for the first time, I realized something that terrified me. I didn't love him anymore. Not in the way I once had. The person I had married, the man who had been my partner, my equal, was gone, replaced by someone who had betrayed me in a way I couldn't forget. And so, we separated. It wasn't an explosive fight, nor was it a dramatic ending. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The decision had been made long before either of us spoke it aloud. I moved out, found a small apartment in the city, and began to rebuild my life. But even as I settled into this new chapter, I couldn't escape the haunting memory of that Tuesday night, the night I caught my husband with the maid. It would remain with me forever, a painful reminder that sometimes, the life we build with someone can be destroyed in a single fleeting moment of betrayal. And yet, in the aftermath, I found something unexpected: freedom. The freedom to reclaim my own life, to find strength in the face of the pain, and to understand that not every broken relationship needs to be fixed. Some things are better left behind.